Hello to all those who have joined so far for this tips and tricks webinar. We'll begin here in a moment. I'm seeing more and more trickle in, so give this just a moment, but welcome. Perfect. Well, welcome to our tips and tricks webinar around equipment management. We appreciate you all attending today. Andrew and I are your hosts. We'll get into some intros here in a moment, and we'll introduce ourselves. But looking forward to this webinar for our tips and tricks process here around equipment management. Andrew, if you'll go to the next slide. Before we get started, this session will be recorded and shared with all those who registered for this event today. Please, if you have any questions, submit them via the Q&A button at the bottom. We'll look to answer your questions perhaps throughout the session via chat, depending on the question, but most of the questions we'll address during the Q&A session at the end. As I shared, Andrew and I we're your hosts today. I'm an account manager here at Qualio. I work closely with your customer success managers. So if I haven't met you yet, I look forward to meeting you all. I generally am here to support your needs as a customer around any commercial conversations going forward. We have Andrew Bodger, who is one of our subject matter experts around equipment management. He has 10 plus years of experience in the pharmaceutical industry working at AstraZeneca, and has worked in and managed a quality control laboratory with various analytical equipment today. So he'll be the subject matter expert jumping into this material. I'm more of a host and a moderator here for today, and looking forward to this. Both med device companies and pharmaceutical companies today have equipment that needs to be managed, maintained, and serviced. Qualio is a great central location to store these details like equipment specifications, calibration due dates, equipment-related deviations, and vendors. That being said, this webinar today has an intended audience to those that are looking to manage their equipment today inside or outside of Qualio, and we'd like to address that for those organizations, whether you're in the laboratory space, manufacturing space, or if your product is in market or even in research and development stages, we realize you have equipment to manage today. Andrew, if you'll go to the next slide. Today's agenda will look to understand and showcase how you can use Qualio to the fullest for equipment management. That being said, Andrew's going to go over these three areas around docs, events, and suppliers, and how we can manage equipment management in Qualio today. So without further ado, I'm going to be here throughout. We have a couple poll questions, but we want to jump into the agenda and go through some of these things. And as we go first, we're going to jump into documents and how you can manage your equipment management today within Qualio. So Andrew, I'll kick it to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Austin. So as Austin just mentioned, we'll first be looking at documents and how they relate to equipment management. So the primary objective here in this section is looking at how every piece of equipment should be documented in Qualio. Before we start though, it's important that you have an equipment management procedure. And if you're using Qualio, it makes sense that you have that in Qualio. Some sections that we'd recommend that you include would be how you define and identify your equipment. Make sure that you have unique identifiers for each piece of instrumentation. You could talk about calibration expectations, how you manage calibrations or events associated with those, maybe things like deviations or out of calibration events. And then also looking at maintenance plan and how you schedule those. If you don't have a equipment management procedure, or maybe you're missing some of these areas or not entirely sure what you'd want to include in those sections, you can always reach out to Qualio, as we have a plus service that can provide some guidance there. All right, so we're already hopping into our first poll question, so I'll turn it over to Austin.
I told you I wouldn't be a stranger, that I'd jump back in here. I've got some. Boom, we're already getting answers to this. So we're looking to understand, how do you currently manage your equipment today? So thank you for those that are already submitting this. I'll give this a couple more seconds within the answers here, and I'll share the results. Oh, I should read to you the options as well. As you're looking at this, do you manage it via an Excel file, via enterprise software, SAP, in Qualio today, or not yet, or not applicable? So let me end this poll, share the results with you all. Looks like we have a lot of majority today within utilizing an Excel file, some within the enterprise software area, and also some within Qualio. So good to note. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and also with what I'm seeing here on the results, I was expecting a lot of people would be using Excel files. It's also what my last company used to do as well for a time before we moved into enterprise software. So I think today, with what we're going through with equipment management, we're going to be able to provide a lot of insight and good ideas for how you could start doing that in Qualio. And I am happy to see that there are a few people on today's call that are actively using Qualio. So hopefully this is a bit of a refresher. Maybe there's a few new tips we can offer you. All right, so first up, you should have an equipment file in Qualio. So what we recommend here is that you would create a document template, and you could call it equipment file. And then you would create a document using that template for every piece of instrumentation that you have. And some important things to note here, as we can see in the bullet points, would be things like your internal equipment ID or your asset ID. Each piece of equipment should have a unique identifier. So if you already have assets, probably a good idea to include that in the title of these documents when you create them. Alternatively, if you maybe don't have a full system yet with identification for each of your equipment, you may already know though that documents within Qualio have unique identifiers. So you could even use that equipment document ID to represent your equipment ID. Some other things that you could include in this file for each of your equipment would be, various details such as manufacturer, model, and serial number, operating range or calibrated range for that equipment. For that, you can, on this slide, we just have like a screenshot that you can take from the operating manual or wherever you find that on the manufacturer's website. And then lastly, in the section at the bottom would be your calibration and PM frequency. So it'd probably be good to note information like when that equipment went into service or potentially when it went out of service. Also include things like the calibration frequency. Maybe you do that calibration every 12 months, and then preventative maintenance frequency. And perhaps that's every 6 months or 3 months, depending on that. So just noting that initial information for how you're going to use that equipment. This slide then shows a couple other bits of information that you would include within this equipment file. So this second section here for the calibration PM is just a simple table that'll be identifying what dates maybe you did your installation of that equipment and the installation qualification. Next row would include your calibration dates, when it was last performed, when the next due date is, and then similarly for preventative maintenance, when it was last performed, when your next due date is. Your comments box, this is just an idea, but you could include any type of information here. You could record various events, maybe auto calibrations or deviations if you have any, put those there, or maybe any notes that the service provider gave you at the last calibration event. You can just note those so you have that record going forward. And then that last section at the bottom there is attachments. So it'd be good to include things like PDFs of your equipment manual, and then your IQ, OQ, PM, whatever kind of paperwork you're getting from that service provider. When they do those services, you can just attach that here. So then you'll just have that growing list over time. So you can always come back to this file, and all the paperwork that you ever had related to this equipment will just be in one easy to find location. All right, turning it back over to Austin again for our second poll question for the day.
Thanks, Andrew. Well, jumping into maintenance calendar, we're looking to understand how do you currently manage your maintenance calendar? And let me launch the poll so you get this. So today, how are you currently managing your maintenance calendar? Do you do it via an Excel, calendar reminder, and events using Outlook or other certain calendar functionalities within whatever you're using, enterprise software, SAP? Are you using Qualio today in Qualio? Or by chance, are you using Post-it notes and sending out prayers and good vibes out there just to know if your maintenance calendar is in check? Give it just a moment more as these are trickling in. Perfect. Thanks for those who have submitted. Let me share these results so that you all can see what your peers and other colleagues that are using Qualio today, where they sit within maintenance calendar. Once again, a lot within Excel, some utilizing calendar reminders and events to notify them, some today within enterprise software, some within utilizing Qualio today, and some putting out those post-it notes of maybe it's a reminder here, a reminder there of we need to check something. So good to know. I'll stop the results here.
Yeah, and this is a distribution I was kind of expecting to see. I think Excel is pretty common. If you're already using Excel files to manage your equipment, it would make sense then that you have columns for when those next due dates are, and you're filtering and sorting that accordingly to see what's upcoming. And typically, also my last company, we had those linked in with calendar reminders. An obvious downside of using Excel is that you're not getting automated reminders, so it does require a pretty large manual lift to make sure that you're not missing something. So again, kind of as was mentioned before, I think Qualio will have some options here, some good options for you that can help you automate that a bit and not miss out on any services that you need. So with that, how do we accomplish that? Because we're using documents for all these equipment files, maybe some of you already saw this coming, but every document in Qualio in the Properties tab has a review period, right? So you're setting up periodic review to then schedule and track these. So, normally it would just be your normal document periodic review, but because we're now using documents for these equipment files, you can really treat that review period as like your calibration due date. So you'll notice here where we have that box in yellow that highlights where it says the review period is, in this example, 3 months from the effective date. It's important to keep that in mind. So say you're on a 12-month calibration cycle, when you have say you just do your calibration event, you'll want to then make sure that you set in your properties that that next calibration event is due in 12 months. But you do need to be aware that maybe it takes you some time to review that paperwork and get that approved. So if it takes you a few weeks or a month, you'll then maybe want to make sure that you set your review period to 11 months. So that way you're continuing to keep up on that frequency of every 12 months for that service, rather than lapsing because you took a little bit longer. Now it's 13-month calibration or 14-month, right? So just be aware that you're setting that review period appropriately right before you approve these documents. So now let's go over why we'd want to use review period. What are some benefits of doing this with the documents in Qualio? Well, for one, you get email notifications, and these will come out to you 10 days in advance of that document being due for periodic review. You can also then use the periodic review report, and this will allow you to get the whole list of documents, including your equipment files that are due up to 6 months in advance. I believe there's also other options for looking at every 30 days or what's up, coming up in 3 months. So you can use that as you need to keep track of what's upcoming. There's also the dashboard where you can then link over to what's upcoming in the next 30 days. And then lastly, document analytics, which is a new feature for us. It's actually what we're talking about here on this slide then. So with this new analytics feature, you can maybe start asking and answering the questions, well, how many equipment calibrations do I have coming up in the future here? So by selecting analytics within Qualio and then choosing, in this example, the documents tab and then periodic review, you can start to see what do we have here for periodic review. You'd want to make note here of what we have circled in red on the right side, where we sorted by our document type. So rather than having SOPs and policies and other documents, you want to now choose that equipment file. So now you're only getting your list of equipment files and your calibrations that are coming up for that periodic review. So this will help you see that distribution of what instrumentation is coming up and how that's spread out over the various time frame that you're looking at. Something that I always wanted to know when I was managing the lab is making sure that we weren't overwhelmed on certain months. We often had calibrations that would stack up in June and December. A lot of people are on vacations, trying to go on holiday. So you kind of want to pay attention to those and maybe redistribute some of those maintenance events to other months and distribute that workload. In addition to the equipment file, we'd recommend another type of document that can be quite helpful. So, our name for what you could call this is a lab directory file or just a lab file. But the idea here is that you're creating some sort of a directory where you can then smart link all of your equipment in a given area. So in this case, we create a new document template called lab or laboratory. And you maybe only need to create one document of this type. But if perhaps you have multiple laboratories, maybe you have a quality control lab, an R&D lab, maybe you also have manufacturing areas, you could create an individual file for each of those lab and manufacturing spaces. The goal here then would be in this top little pink box that's highlighted is that you can smart link your entire equipment list for that area. So you can now have a smart link list of everything in your quality control lab. For your file for your R&D lab, you can now have that list of just what's in the R&D lab, just what's in the manufacturing space. So it can be that nice way for you to just quickly figure out what's in this place, what could I possibly have to, maintain and manage, and you can get there pretty easily. The rest of this document that we have here is just various ideas that could help you make this more useful, right? So obviously the main focus here was just that equipment list, but maybe you have other things like we have at the top where you're listing chemical hazards or what personal protective equipment do you need before entering that lab space. Below the equipment list, we have highlighted spreadsheets and calculations. My last lab, we had validated spreadsheets that we'd use to calculate assay results or other types of results. Maybe they're even related to calibrations that you do for certain equipment. So people on my team would often ask me, well, Andrew, where was that calculation spreadsheet? Was it in Dropbox? Is it somewhere else? Well, now you can just put it in one location. It makes it really easy for people to find exactly what it is. You can also then control it so that way everybody's using the same spreadsheet every time because you have it attached here to this file that you're approving. I know it's more and more common now for labs to be moving to electronic laboratory notebooks, but maybe you're still using paper notebooks. It's possible that you may want to have a table here that just like lists out your lab notebooks, who's the owner for them. You can just track and manage that. Lastly, safety data sheets. Maybe this is also one of those, probably the most important things. I would find this most helpful. I would actually wish I had this in my last lab. Because we are often trying to figure out, well, do we have our SDSs in a binder in the lab, or is it in a binder in the office area, or do I have to go to some website to find them? Is it on our SharePoint or something? Again, you're kind of just making a one-stop shop here with your lab file and just constantly directing people, well, it's in Qualio, go to the lab file, go to the lab file, right? It'll have all that information that you're looking for. So again, these are just some ideas of what you might want to include, but you can really tailor this to your specific needs. Another thing to note here is using tags for equipment management. So we already talked about creating equipment files, and you'll have your unique IDs for those, and then maybe creating the lab files as well. So you can search for those in the document workspace in the library, sorting by the IDs, like the EQP or the lab in this example. But maybe you have multiple lab spaces or manufacturing spaces, and you need to help differentiate because now you just have a long list of equipment, but you want to know, well, again, what's my equipment in a given lab or a given manufacturing area? Again, you could just go back to that lab file we just talked about on the previous slide and go through that information, or you could use the tag system to maybe create a tag for the different lab or the different manufacturing space. Or perhaps you want to create tags for product line or some other needs. You could even use out of service tags. Again, you're probably still going to have an out of service label on your equipment so people know it's not in service, temporarily or permanently. But you can also note that in the Qualio document system here, and that may also just be another way for people to know, oh, there's something up with this equipment. You're just making people more aware of it using that tag. All right, so the last section we just went through was all related to documents. Now we're going to start looking at events and how they relate to equipment management. So main objective here is just logging and tracking those events. You're likely to have a few different types of events related to your equipment. Could be deviations, could be laboratory investigations, or it could be out of calibration or out of tolerance events. So since you're using events, you're going to create those templates for those. Well, now after you've had your lab running for a few years or however long it is, you now have a list of events. Could be deviations, lab investigations, OCs, whatever the distribution is. Within the analytics feature here, you can select the events portion, and maybe in this example, where you're just looking at status overview, and you want to get that distribution of what's open and closed. And in the box on the right, you can then select what type of event you're looking at. So in this case, it's looking at everything, but maybe you want to filter that down and only look at the deviations, or only the out of calibrations, and see what's open and closed, how many you have of those. So you can start now using this analytics feature to give you a little bit more information of what's going on. Before, we were just looking at documents and due dates associated with those. Now we're starting to do a little bit more analysis here. There's likely going to be some other questions that you're then asking related to events. Who has open actions? Is there a root cause trend? Are we closing events within the target timeline? Are there any overdue events? So here's just some example plots of what you might be getting there. In that first example on the upper left, seeing a plot here of sorting by action owner. This would be important to me if I was still managing a lab, where I'd want to know, okay, I have all these events that have occurred. Well, who are they all assigned to? Oh, I can see in this example that it's heavily favoring one or two people. I now want to redistribute this workload and spread that across the team and make sure that my people on my team are happy and comfortable. They're not getting overwhelmed. We can also sort by root cause. We're looking at the upper right. So again, this can kind of give you that baseline information to help you start to see, what areas are these events occurring in. People are probably commonly using your root cause analysis techniques where you're looking at a method, material, environment, equipment, people, things like that. Well, now you can start breaking that down and taking a look at that. You can also look at cycle time. So on the lower left, you're trying to understand how long are these events taking to close. You're trying to achieve your target due date. Maybe you're trying to close things always within 2 weeks, but maybe you want to set a tighter internal target, of 7 days or 10 days, something that you're able to then track and see, like, are we meeting this internal target that will ensure that we never go overdue on these events? So the cycle time plot can give you some useful information there. And then lastly, we have our plot on the lower right, just looking at time and whether things are due or overdue. Now we're moving into the discussion about suppliers, and that's in its relation to equipment management. So our main objective here is that every vendor and service provider is documented within Qualio. So those of you that are currently using the suppliers feature, you'll know that you have a policy and you can create this matrix, or on the y-axis, you're sorting by supplier type, x-axis, you're looking at your risk level, and then you have those tabs for looking at required documents and audits. Well, what we're mainly focused on here in this example is just looking at those supplier types. So you could list out equipment manufacturers, service providers, maybe you're using third-party service providers that will calibrate and maintain your equipment rather than the equipment manufacturer themselves. But you can create those here and list them in to your policy. And then you can also list out some of those required documents. So maybe you have a statement of work or service level agreement or annual contracts and quotes. Again, you can list those here in your matrix of what's required. But obviously, if you're using suppliers, you probably already know this, but you can attach additional documents. So put the basic requirements here, but you always have that flexibility to add more documentation if you need it. So an example here would be adding vendors in your essential contact information. So let's say in this example, like we're using Agilent, maybe they provide us with a GC or an HPLC. Well, we can type in and enter in their general Agilent contact information, maybe a link to their website. But at the bottom, we can list out that field technician. So maybe you always have a particular technician that comes onto your site to do that service, and you want people to be able to contact them quickly and easily. Put their information here in that details tab. Then you also have the supporting documents tab. So again, this is where you can attach that statement of work or that service level agreement. And the idea is that you're keeping all the information related to that vendor in one easy to find location. All right. And with that, we're nearing the end here, and we're at the Q&A. So I think I'm turning it back over to Austin for a little bit here to read through some questions that have come through.
Thanks, Andrew. And thanks for walking through all that around docs, events, and suppliers for equipment management. We're here to the Q&A portion. We've got a couple here that have trickled in even right now. So great to see some questions pop in. We had a question come up, Andrew, when we were at the periodic review area, and let me read that to you now. But as you have questions, we'll look to address these. This is one of our more informative portion of our tips and tricks that we can go through these questions. Andrew's done a really good job of describing everything and going through everything around equipment management, but we understand that you'll have questions or things that maybe you have feedback after this call too. So let me jump into this periodic review question for you, Andrew. It says periodic review only shows what is upcoming in 30 days to non-quality users in the dashboard. Correct. So that's the first part of the question. If so, feedback is to allow users to see periodic review longer so they can plan out and make sure they have the supplies they need on hand to complete the work. Do you want me to read the first part again? Sorry.
Yeah, was that a statement or a question?
I guess the second part's a statement, but periodic review only shows what is upcoming in 30 days to non-quality users in the dashboard. Is that correct?
I'm actually forgetting the exact details regarding the user roles. And I apologize. I'm almost always logged into Qualio as a quality level user during the onboarding. So I know I can always be that. But I can follow up on that and see if normal users can only maybe see up to 30 days. But I definitely know as a quality level user, if you're looking at that report, you can see up to 6 months in advance.
Okay. Jenna, we'll get back to you on that within feedback is to allow users to see that periodic review longer, but we'll get back to you on that one. Thanks for that question. A question from Kelly. Can you attach or upload to an asset to record calibration certificates, IQ, OQ, PQ, protocol reports, user manual, etc.?
Yeah, so I think so you can upload these documents in a few different places. I think the one that I first recommended would be in the equipment file. So you'd have your document there, and we had an attachment section at the end in our example. So you can attach any sort of documentation that you want, whatever's relevant to you, IQ, OQ, PQ, again, anything that you have relevant to it, put it there. Alternatively, you can put it into the suppliers feature. So maybe that's where you want to house all your documents. So as I just showing, actually the previous slide, I believe, you have that supporting documents tab. So again, maybe you're putting in your statement of work and service level agreement with that service provider, but you could also put in all the IQ, OQ, PQ paperwork there, right? So you have a couple different options. Probably find whichever one works best for you and go with that.
I would say we'd go back to slides, but then maybe the next question we'd be going to other slides and we'd be looking at other pictures, but the deck, everything will be shared after the call, Kelly, to review that, but whatever you think's best as well, Andrew. So thank you for that question, Kelly, and thanks, Andrew. The next one from Devong, if I'm pronouncing your name correct, can you add multiple vendor techs?
Technically, yes. Okay, if I can quickly find these slides and we'll go back to them, I will. So here in the supplier, I assume you're asking about like that supplier contact information about adding those field technicians. My understanding is that those are just single fields, but they are just like open text boxes. So you could enter in multiple field techs and contacts, just separate them by commas. Yeah, you can enter in anything that you need here. There's also then like a general note section in suppliers. So again, you could maybe even put in like the second contact's information there. Again, it won't be separated by like name and email and what's that phone number, address, etc. So maybe you have your primary contact in those dedicated fields on the left, your alternate contact to be listed in the notes on the right side.
Perfect. We had a couple other come through around calibration that I thought it'd be good to go through. It might be similar to Kelly's questions around record calibration, but we have 2 questions around calibration that I want to get to here for you, Andrew. Can you walk us through what it will look like to log your PM and calibration in the equipment file?
Yeah, so try to quickly go back a few slides then. All right, so I think a good starting point would be that you create, sorry, maybe now I'm spending too much time trying to find these. Okay. Important thing to note would be that when you first create your equipment file, right, your first version, you're just probably recording, whatever the last calibration due date was or your last PM date, and you're going to have a future date coming up. Could be tomorrow, could be in a few months from now. But then in your attachment section, you're also then going to attach, whatever current documentation you have. Again, that's a way for you to, maybe take things out of Excel or out of whatever directory you're currently using and now consolidate it and put it all into Qualio, right? So then you can approve that document. Now you have an approved effective document in Qualio with this table filled out. Then going forward, when you have your next calibration service or PM service date, you'll then want to open up this equipment file, put it into draft, and then you can update these dates in the table. So put in the new date, then the new last performed date, update that new due date that's now 12 or 6 months following that, and then you'll attach the new set of documents. I wouldn't remove the earlier attachments. So in this example, we have a IQOQ document that was dated on February 3rd of 2023. I would still keep that there, and now just below that attach the next file. And then when you have your next service, attach the one below that. Then you'll just have a growing list of all that. And each time you'll be putting your document into draft, updating the dates and attachments, sending it for approval. 6 months later, put it into draft, update it, send it for review and approval. Hopefully that answers that first question.
Ray, thank you for that one. I mean, I realize there's so much around calibration too that we can jump into, one through suppliers, one from just the initial docs piece. And this is actually a question around docs. So we've got a few here. Thank you for that question, Ray. Jumping to another one, we have a few here. So from Jason, if you have existing, or I'm assuming that was existing equipment forms from an existing template, can you import them into the new EQP form designation? Sorry, I'll get to the calibration, but what you were sharing here, I thought it'd be great to maybe show, maybe if someone has existing forms today.
Yeah, if I'm understanding this correctly, it sounds like somebody has a form that maybe they fill out for their equipment services or calibrations or things like that. What we showed here on this slide and also the previous one is just an example of information that you could, record for, various equipment details or your calibration information. If you have a form, you could, just recreate or take that structure in your form and just replicate that here in Qualio. So again, we just give an example of what you could use for an equipment file, but it's up to you however you want to tailor it. You're not locked into using this format. So make it useful for you, make it reflect what you need for your business. Or maybe as part of your equipment services, perhaps you're filling out a form and you're documenting information on it and you just want to attach to the equipment file. Well, you could do that too, and you just put it in the attachment section down here. I get that there's probably a lot of companies that are kind of in a hybrid approach where they're not fully doing everything electronically. Maybe there's still certain documents that you print out or use outside of Qualio. If that's, sounds like you, take those, fill out that paperwork outside of Qualio, scan it, PDF, and now just attach it here. But whatever makes sense for you. The idea is that you're getting all that information into your equipment file in Qualio and trying to consolidate it all so people know that they just go to one place to find what they're looking for.
Great. Jason, thanks for that question. Andrew, thanks for walking through. Let me see here. The next one, sorry, I jumped to that one because I thought it was pretty relevant to what you were sharing. Back to the supporting calibration, I have a question from John here. Does Qualio have the capability to support calibration frequency in terms of trending? Is that maybe showing the trending piece within analytics? Maybe I'm reading that wrong, so I'll read it again to you, Andrew. Does Qualio have the capability to support calibration frequency in terms of trending?
Calibration frequency in terms of trending. I feel like the way I'm interpreting that question is, could I use analytics to tell me how many instruments I have on a 3-month cycle, 6-month cycle, 12-month cycle? I don't think you would. As far as I know, the analytics feature in some of those graphs that we have would just show you like when something's due. It wouldn't necessarily indicate to you that it was a 6-month service or a 12-month service. Because again, what you're using to track your maintenance is just the periodic review date for that document. Your document will only have one periodic review date. You're not able to set multiple dates such as, like in this table here that you see on the screen, you have a date due for calibration and a date due for PM, but you're still just going to have one periodic review date, which you're going to make the earlier date. So in this case, hopefully my math is right, just going to be the August 2023. That's your next service. So you would set your periodic review to be 3 months from now. And then when that service completes, you would now update your preventative periodic review to now say 6 months, because that's now when the next service date is coming up. So yeah, you won't be able to differentiate that in the document. And then of course you wouldn't really be able to get that differentiation in the analytics feature.
Okay. I missed, or I just saw it. Maybe Jason, you put your follow-up question from the last question via, let me double check it. Existing equipment forms from an existing template. Can you import them? Jason had a follow-up. We've got more that have trickled in, but I wanted to get to the follow-up just because it's there. So Jason says, if you have an existing Qualio form template that you use for equipment forms, can you convert them to the EQP form type?
Once a template has been selected for a document in Qualio, that template is locked. You wouldn't be able to convert an existing form, maybe it's form 1. You wouldn't be able to convert that to an EQP1. You would have to just create a new document in Qualio for that, if I'm understanding this question correctly. But yeah, let's say you just have that form in Qualio. Well, you can probably obsolete that form and make it, create a new equipment file and transfer that information over to it. Alternatively, if you want, maybe your form is just you have a file attached where somebody would download that attachment and work with that outside of Qualio. You could just convert it, instead of having the attachment, well, maybe you just now put all these tables and that representative information directly into that Qualio document. So now, rather than downloading that attachment using outside Qualio, you're now just working with it directly in Qualio. You'll just have to kind of be aware that if it is a form and it's mixed in with other logs and other types of forms, it may not be entirely clear to somebody that form now is an equipment file, right? Because you wouldn't maybe have this EQP ID associated with it. So there are some other things to consider for that. But yeah, if you just want to replace your current form and just convert that to an equipment file, you definitely could.
Deal. Thank you. Question from Gladys. Can I import an Excel sheet with all the equipment info?
Unfortunately, no. It will be a bit of a time-consuming and tedious process, so you would have to go through and create these one by one, meaning creating all the documents. So you can create your equipment file template, and then from there, maybe you have 100 pieces of equipment. You'll have to create, individually 100 documents. You will have to manually enter in all that information. Unfortunately, we don't have a way to extract all that information from an Excel file. Maybe, if we have any people from our product team on here listening, that would actually be, something great to consider, because, we saw how many people on this call today are using Excel files to manage their equipment. If there's an easy way to extract that and, maybe pre-populate some of this, knowing that there's probably still some manual parts they'd have to, fill in, but that would be a great way to just get people up and running rather than, having to spend, hours, more likely days and weeks trying to get all that equipment stuff in here.
So if product's not on here, am I taking that as homework, or are you taking that as homework to the product team? And I'm just kidding. I'm not.
Well, we both can. How about that?
A deal. We'll both take that. Yeah. I like that. Question here from Michelle. Could you link the suppliers to the equipment file?
I think if I remember right, sorry, it's been a little while. I forget if we can link a document to a supplier file. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So when you're attaching documents in that supporting documents tab, you can either attach a PDF, or if it's already an existing file in Qualio, you could attach that. That may be your way then that you want to link suppliers to that equipment file. Normally what I was thinking for supporting documents is you would just put in statement of work or service level agreement. But yeah, if you just want to also then link to your equipment file, you could do that too. Perfect. I think you would still go through the same route, like you're adding a new document, and then there should be like a 2-option dropdown, like it's either an existing Qualio document or you're attaching a file. So you would just choose the Qualio document option.
Michelle has a follow-up to that. If I'm reading this right, Michelle, sorry if I'm jumping to it, but just seeing your name, I'm like, seeing if you've got a follow-up within this. Also, auditors want to see an equipment list with the next due dates. Looking at these individual will be tedious for the auditor.
So seeing a full list with all the due dates for them. I think what you have to use is the report. So you, at the top quality, you'd select report and then choose periodic review. Your equipment files will be, intermingled with all the, SOPs, work instructions, and all that. So I don't think you'll be getting. I can understand that challenge. Like you won't be getting just the equipment list. And then also if you can definitely filter within Qualio's workspace and library to show just that equipment list, but yeah, it's not going to be listing out that due date. So that would be maybe that's another area to highlight for product team here is, some other functionality that would allow people to quickly sort through and find not just their full equipment list or those equipment files, but also what's the next periodic review date or calibration due date associated with that.
Great. We have a few more questions to trickle through here. Speaking still on equipment file, in service out or in service out of service, how does it differentiate the out of service date when the equipment is decommissioned at a later date?
I think, let's go back to that equipment file. I need to start remembering what number slide this was. Okay. Yeah, I think in the example here, maybe it wasn't the perfect example, having an in-service and an out-of-service in the same line and not clearly labeling like whether it's in service or out of service. I think if you're going to label equipment as out of service, you'd probably want to have two separate lines here, so you can put that as out of service. Then you'll want to approve the document and then retire it. So now it's in the retired document section of Qualio. And it can be, then it's not in like your normal equipment list. Now I'm suspecting I didn't answer the question. So Austin, would you mind repeating that for me so I can?
No worries. So for in service and out of service, how does it differentiate the out of service date when the equipment is decommissioned at a later date?
Okay, maybe there's still a part I'm not fully understanding, but yeah, I think you're just going to want to have two separate fields for in service and out of service dates. So again, I think if you were putting in equipment out of service, you'll want to enter that date here. Maybe this is where you apply a tag to that document, and then you can call that as out of service. If you're decommissioning it later, maybe that's the point where you then retire the document. But yeah, maybe then there's kind of like a gap where if the file's been out of service but not decommissioned yet, it still is showing in your list in the workspace, so people might think it's still in service. Again, you might have to use the tag at that point to label it as out of service before you retire it. Or maybe you're since you can restore retired documents, maybe if it goes out of service, you temporarily retire it. If it needs to come back into service, you can reinstate that document, and then if it does go to the decommission stage, you can just retire it and then again just leave it there permanently. Perfect.
Just wanting to remind, just to give you all some ideas of how to manage that for you today. So thank you, Andrew. Jumping here to another one. Someone's asking, Andrew's asking, we have Qualio today. This is a customer base webinar. When can we start using the equipment calibration module? Is there a validation of the module that we need to complete, or can we just start using it today?
I'm going to use this as a moment to make a plug again to our product team. Hopefully, they're on here again. No, we do not have an equipment module at this time in Qualio. It's not like, how you see events or suppliers or design controls at the top. We don't have a dedicated equipment module. I personally would love to see one because I think it would be fantastic. But no, because we're using documents and document templates to reflect these equipment files in Qualio, you're just going to have to go into the document portion of Qualio and then navigate to find those documents, just by searching up the equipment IDs. or like if you label all your equipment files with like say an EQP prefix or E, whatever it is that you decide in your template, you'll just have to know how to search for those or use tags to filter and locate them. But again, I would love to see a dedicated equipment feature in Qualio. That would make this a lot easier.
More feedback for you and I, Andrew, to go back to product and say, hey, this is something that the customers are asking. So thank you.
Yep.
If we use, here's a question from Woo. If we use periodic review to track calibrations, will updating the document for new equipment information, updating manuals, etc., reset the periodic review and hence extending the schedule inadvertently?
Yeah, so the periodic review is always tied to whenever the document was made effective. So that's what we see where it's highlighted here is review period 3 months from effective date. So it will trigger that periodic review anytime this document goes through a new draft and then approval stage. So let's say that you make no other changes to your document and you only update it every time you have a PM or a calibration event. Well, then you'll still update the properties here to reflect it. But yeah, you'll just be updating, you'll change it, every 6 months or every 3 months or whatever it is, accordingly. But if you had to make a new edit to that equipment file and maybe change some of the equipment information, or maybe you're updating your calibration frequency or something like that, because now you put that document into draft, it's now going to then be resetting that periodic review period. So again, you'll want to make sure that you set that appropriately so that way you're not lapsing on your calibration. So I'd always be going back then to just check, where was my slide here? Always going back to this table. So it's important that you stay up to date on this table and record, the last time that a service was performed. So that way, if you have to do some non-service related revisions to these documents, that you're making sure that you can set that appropriate review date.
Perfect. You ready for a fun one? This is a suggestion question for you.
Perfect.
Andrew. Do you have a suggestion for this from Isabel? I'll introduce that for you, Isabel, if you're to get you here. Do you have a suggestion for how to track equipment repairs or as needed maintenance that would not be included in a maintenance schedule?
Yeah, I think actually one of my early drafts or iterations of what we see here on the screen in this table was to have some like non-routine service recorded. You could just put another row in the table. And that's pretty common to see for equipment, that you'll have like those non-routine services or repairs or things like that. It won't affect maybe your calibration to your PM frequency, but you just still want to record that. So yeah, I would add another section here. And again, if you have some documentation related to that service, just for your own records, you can put that in the attachments section. You can always then also use that comments field. So like maybe below PM, you now have a row that says like your non-routine services, and you put those dates there, and then you can put in the comments field give some detail about what that non-routine service was that happened, last week. Maybe you're, just doing some replacement of a part on the equipment, and you just record that. I think that'd be a good place to do it. Again, it will just keep it all in kind of like the same location here. So anytime somebody needs to find something about when did somebody do maintenance or any type of activity on this equipment, they're just going to this one location and they get all that information. They see all the attachments there.
Nice. Good to know for me too. Thank you for patience on some of these questions. I'm getting to some that are even earlier here for a while. This one's from David. If you have an out of schedule maintenance event and want to document on the asset, does it reset the periodic review for scheduled maintenance calibration? Kind of similar to our other periodic review questions, but if you schedule that maintenance event and want to document on the asset, does it reset it?
Yeah, I think as I was mentioning a little bit before, anytime that you put these documents through like a draft and then approval workflow, it is going to reset that periodic review timing, again, based on when that document becomes effective. If it's a non-routine service, kind of as we were just talking about a moment ago, and you don't want that to affect your periodic review frequency, you'll just have to make sure that because you initiated a new draft, you'll just have to look back at the prior maintenance and make sure that the new date being sent to properties will reflect to make sure that it's still adhering to that schedule. Or perhaps you're moving up a calibration. Maybe you're using analytics feature and you're seeing, hey, we have a whole lot of calibrations and maintenance events that are coming up in November, December. we know there's a lot of holidays around then. Maybe we want to move those up a little bit earlier and now kind of offset some of these routine maintenances. Yeah, you just trigger an earlier calibration, update your document accordingly, and then in the properties, make sure you set that new frequency to get that event to occur, or sorry, your next periodic review to occur a little bit earlier than before.
Okay. Going further more into this kind of calibration aspect, Fresha has a question here. Can one customize further to add calibration parameters, example, temperature, pressure, volume for a particular equipment to ensure all calibration aspects are covered? Or can one link to calibration SOP?
If I'm understanding that right, it sounds like maybe they want to add more information to this equipment information section. Yeah, again, this is, just an example we provide, but maybe instead of, maybe you still want to list your operating range, but now you want to add like your calibrated range, or you want to put in other parameters that are relevant to you. In this screenshot, honestly, there's probably some information in that operating range that isn't all that relevant. So again, only put in what's needed for you, and add in all those extra details. So that way, that if somebody's looking at this equipment or trying to maintain it, they have that proper list of the right ranges that the instrument should operate within.
Great. This one was submitted twice. So Marie, thank you for submitting it. I apologize that I didn't catch it the first one, that I'm reading your question like, oh, it's a duplicate here. So this is from Marie. Isn't the lab, or unless two people typed the same question, which could be possible too, isn't the lab directory file a duplication of the individual equipment documents? What are the advantages of having this?
Yeah, so let's go back to that. Should be here. Okay. Yeah, so I think if we were just looking at section 2 on this lab file where it has your smart links to your equipment list, that person was absolutely correct that this is no different than just going to the document library and just searching up, typing in ID:EQP and just getting that list of equipment, right? This is not providing you any additional benefit in that regard. What I'm proposing with a lab file like this is that you can not only have your equipment list, but you can find some other ways to make this more useful for you. In a document library or workspace, you will only have documents. You're not going to be able to add any other information to that, so you'll just have your list of equipment. Whereas a lab file here, because it's a document, you can add other useful stuff to you for that lab space. So again, if you want to list out, things like PPE that's required in the area, or chemical hazards, validated spreadsheets, Excel spreadsheets that you're using, safety data sheets, could be a host of other things. Again, if you find value in putting more information into a file like this, in addition to having that smart link list of equipment, you can do it. If that wouldn't be useful for you, and you don't think you'd use it, a document like this for those other reasons, then I'd say don't worry about having a lab file. Just go with those equipment files, and that you can search them up in the document library, and that will work for you too.
Perfect. Thanks for the recommendations on that, Andrew, and good to get your insight, and thanks for walking through that again. That we may have, this might be past this motion. This is something that I'm not familiar with, Andrew. So if we need to take this one and follow up later, the question is this similar to a CMMS?
It's been a little, now that I've been out of the industry for a year and a half or 2 years, I'm forgetting what some of the acronyms are. I think CMMS would have been like a software dedicated to managing equipment, or maybe it's like a web-based program for managing equipment. I think this would be similar to that. However, a software like a CMMS is probably going to be giving you more information related to your equipment. It might be better tracking services like that, because I think softwares like that are more focused and dedicated to managing equipment, whereas we're using the documents feature of Qualio and the periodic review to kind of accommodate equipment management. So it's not a perfect solution, but I would say if you're using Excel currently, what we're offering here in Qualio is going to be better than what you currently have. But if you have the capability of using enterprise software or CMMS or something like that, that's probably going to give you a little bit more information and tracking capability for those services.
Sorry to throw you a curveball here with This one, that wasn't one that I was too familiar with. And I know I said I would try to take some of these, but these are all pointed to you to walk through the product and throw your recommendations. So thank you. We have a time check. We have 5 more minutes. We just have one more question here. And if there's others, feel free to follow up with myself. Andrew, we can connect with your CSMs around this as well. But the last question here from Chance. Auditors typically ask how many pieces of equipment, how many of those require CAL, PM, both CAL and PM. That guides them on how many records to sample. They often ask how many were calibrated in the past 12 months and how many were found out of tolerance. And then he says in parentheses, this is needed. So not necessarily a question in here, but what have you seen, Andrew, within your process when you're going through an auditing process within equipment management, but also how do we utilize Qualio for equipment management from the auditor side piece here from Chance's remarks?
Yeah, I think with this, the analytics that you'd be able to look at, or just sorting through the events feature, will just tell you when things were coming up for that periodic review / calibration and maintenance. But you're not really going to get much more differentiation beyond that. So I don't think you're going to get a full list of, if somebody just want to know how many times did you do, or how many pieces of equipment needed a preventative maintenance over a given time period, or how many were just the calibration. You're not going to really be able to differentiate that. Because again, you're only tracking one periodic review day, which is, reflective of both, depending on when you're updating that document. So yeah, that would be an area that we could consider, again, making the plug. If we had an equipment module, that would probably be something that we would definitely have to consider, because that's something that's needed. That's what auditors will be looking for. Anything that can help you speak to an auditor and provide them information that that they're going to be asking for would be good things for us to consider, including in a feature like that.
Michelle's chimed in with just maybe while you were talking about it around, can we do that within deviations and tags too? Is that a process?
Maybe I'm not fully thinking through, but there could be a way that you could potentially use tags for it. Because tags can be added and removed at any time. So maybe if you're labeling them, with the PM, maybe the last service was a PM, and you apply the PM label to all those, to the various equipment, or maybe when it goes through calibration, you put in the calibration tag and remove the PM once. And now you're getting an idea of what was the last service performed on that. It will require you, of course, to make sure that you're managing those tags appropriately. Yeah, that's a good idea. That's at least a workaround that you can do currently to have some way of tracking that.
And Michelle, if that wasn't where you were chiming in to put that out there, if it was going somewhere else, it was just so in line that I was like, is that a way? And I'm going to actually thanks, Michelle. Perfect. Gladys has put out here. Andrew, if you want to, we can go to the wrap up slide here. I just want to remind you all that this is recorded. This is going to be shared not only with those that have attended today, but those that even registered. So Gladys, know that this will be sent to you and others. So looking forward to this, but let us know if you have questions, feedback, but definitely appreciate your time joining today within the Tips and Tricks webinar around equipment management, and appreciate your participation today.
Yeah.
And Andrew, you might have a plug too.
No, I'd say it was a pleasure being able to talk through this with everybody today, and I definitely had some customers that have been reaching out to me over the past few weeks, asking about this. So I'm glad I was finally able to present and hopefully give you all some good information for how you could do equipment management in Qualio.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.